Imagine standing in front of a mirror, your body changing in ways you never expected. Every curve, every swell, every small detail feels foreign, uncertain, and you ask yourself quietly, almost afraid to admit it, will my tiny breasts survive motherhood? Will my body be enough to carry this life? These are not just questions, they are fears that ripple through the hearts of countless women, fears that whisper in the middle of the night, that tug at self-esteem, that turn what should be joy into anxiety and self-doubt. And yet, these fears are rarely spoken out loud. Until today. It is my absolute privilege to introduce a woman who does just that, who speaks with courage, honesty, and compassion about what it truly feels like to navigate the insecurities, anxieties, and emotional challenges of pregnancy. She will guide us through a journey that is as personal as it is universal, exploring the fragility of our bodies, the resilience within them, and the truths our fears often try to hide. And now, before we listen to her lovely and heartfelt story, please, if you have not, subscribe to this channel now. Leave whatever you're doing right now and like, share, subscribe, and comment on this channel to enable us get feedback from you and improve our communication and interaction with you as we prepare our subsequent episodes. Please press the subscription button now. So, I invite you to lean in, to open your hearts and minds, and to prepare for a conversation that is intimate, real, and profoundly moving. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Ivana Carter as she shares her insights on pregnancy fears and trauma. Will my tiny breasts survive motherhood? As we step into the unspoken, we give voice to the quiet worries, and we witness the courage that comes from acknowledging them.
Every morning, before I even remember who I am, I face the mirror. Not casually, never casually. It is a ritual heavy with tension. I stand there longer than I should, shoulders stiff, breath shallow, eyes drawn immediately to the same place they always go. I don't need to touch or measure, I already know. I compare myself to memories, to images I've absorbed without consent, to bodies that seem to move through the world with an ease I've never known. My reflection never changes, but my disappointment somehow deepens every day. My breasts have followed me like a quiet accusation all my life. Small, barely there, as if my body stopped halfway through becoming a woman. They feel like proof of something missing, something essential. Whenever I look at them, I hear a voice I didn't choose, but learned too well. Not enough. Not enough to feel confident naked, not enough to feel secure in intimacy, not enough to feel proud of the skin I live in. Low self-esteem has a way of turning inward, of poisoning the relationship you have with your own body. Mine became an enemy long before I had the words for it. I don't see softness or sensitivity, I see failure. I see a body that didn't meet expectations, mine or anyone else's. I angle myself differently in the mirror, lift, imagine, fantasize about a version of me that exists only in my head. A version that would be braver, louder, more deserving of love simply because her chest took up more space. Clothes are never just clothes for me. They are armor. I choose them carefully, not for beauty, but for camouflage. Bras with padding, tops with structure, anything that creates the illusion of fullness. I dress to deceive the world, and sometimes myself. Every outfit carries anxiety. Is it obvious? Can they tell? Do I look like less of a woman today? Even when I smile, even when I laugh, there's a tightness in my chest, not from pride, but from shame. That shame is quiet, but it is constant. It hides beneath fabric and practiced confidence. People see me smiling, composed, functioning. They don't see the way I avoid mirrors in public restrooms, or how I tense up when conversations drift toward bodies, pregnancy, or womanhood. They don't see how deeply I fear being exposed, seen too clearly, judged too quickly. What hurts the most is what I've come to believe about myself because of my breasts, that they make me fragile, that they make me inadequate, that they somehow disqualify me from the fullness of womanhood. I carry the belief that my body is weak, incapable, unprepared for what life might demand of it. And now, with the thought of pregnancy, that belief feels louder, almost unbearable. Because if I already feel like my body has failed me, how can I trust it with motherhood? Standing in front of the mirror, I don't just see my breasts. I see years of insecurity. I see fear layered on fear. I see a woman desperate for reassurance, but trapped in self-doubt. This is the silent war I fight every day, one no one applauds, one no one notices. A war between who I am and who I believe I should have been. And every morning, I wonder if I will ever learn to look at myself without flinching. The mirror has never been a neutral object for me. It has always felt like a witness, too honest, too unforgiving. I don't just look into it, I brace myself before I do, as though preparing for a confrontation I know I will lose. My eyes scan my reflection with a harshness I would never turn on another human being. I linger, hoping for a miracle, knowing none will come. Each glance feels like confirmation of an old fear I carry in my bones. I have memorized my body in fragments, not as a whole. My focus always returns to my chest, as if it defines everything else about me. My breasts feel like a quiet betrayal, unchanging, unresponsive to my wishes, indifferent to my longing to feel complete. They are small in a way that feels loud, announcing what I lack even when no one else is looking. And in that silence, my mind fills the space with judgment. I don't remember a time when I wasn't aware of them. Even as a girl, I learned early that womanhood was supposed to arrive with curves, softness, and fullness. When mine didn't, I assumed I had done something wrong, that my body misunderstood the assignment. Over time, this belief hardened into truth inside me. Something about me is defective, not dramatic enough to be spoken out loud, but heavy enough to shape how I exist in the world. Low self-esteem doesn't scream, it whispers constantly. It tells me to shrink my shoulders, to take up less space. It teaches me to apologize with my posture. My body stopped being something I lived in comfortably and became something I managed carefully. I stopped trusting it. I stopped listening to it. I treated it like an unreliable partner, one that might embarrass me at any moment. When I dress, it's never about expression, it's about correction. I dress to fix myself. I search for bras that promise transformation, for fabrics that blur the truth, for angles that soften reality. Every piece of clothing carries emotional weight. Too tight, and my lack is exposed. Too loose, and I disappear entirely. I am constantly negotiating visibility, wanting to be seen, terrified of being truly noticed. The shame I carry is subtle, but relentless. It slips into conversations, into laughter, into moments that should feel light. When people talk about bodies, pregnancy, or femininity, I go quiet. I feel like an outsider listening to a language I was never taught to speak fluently. I smile, nod, participate, but inside I am folding myself smaller, hiding the part of me I believe disqualifies me. Sometimes the mirror feels less like glass and more like a verdict. It reminds me of every comparison I've ever made, every moment I felt less desirable, less confident, less worthy. It feeds the belief that my body is fragile, that it cannot handle change, pressure, or transformation. And now this is where pregnancy enters my fear like a storm. Because if my breasts already feel inadequate, already feel like they are barely holding together my sense of womanhood, what will pregnancy do to them? Will it expose their weakness? Will it punish me for being small? Will it confirm the fear I've always had that my body is not built for the life I want? This is the silent war, not just with my reflection, but with the story I've been telling myself for years. A story where my body is an obstacle instead of a vessel, where softness equals failure, where smallness equals fragility. And every day, standing there in front of the mirror, I fight between two truths, the one my fear screams at me, and the one I am too afraid to believe, that my body may not be my enemy at all, but a wounded ally waiting for kindness. I didn't wake up one day hating my body. This fear has roots. It was planted slowly, carelessly, by voices that didn't know the damage they were doing, and by a world that never questioned the harm of its standards. It began in childhood, in moments that seemed harmless to everyone else, a laugh that lingered too long, a comment said as a joke, a comparison I was never meant to hear but never forgot. I remember the first time someone pointed it out, not directly, not cruelly, just casually. "You're so flat." The words landed softly, but they stayed. They grew teeth. At that age, I didn't have language for shame yet, but my body learned it anyway. I learned to cross my arms instinctively, to slouch without realizing why, to shrink before I even knew I was taking up space. Teasing followed me quietly, never loud enough to protest, never violent enough to justify pain, just enough to make me aware that something about me was different, and in this world, different is rarely kind. As I grew older, the jokes changed, but the message didn't. Friends blossomed into curves, while I remained unchanged. Adults commented without malice, but without care. "You'll fill out eventually. You're just petite. At least you don't have back pain." Each sentence pretending to comfort me, while quietly confirming that there was indeed something missing. Then there was the media, merciless and everywhere. Billboards, movies, music videos, social media feeds filled with bodies celebrated for their fullness, their softness, their undeniable femininity. Breasts were everywhere, symbols of desirability, power, womanhood, and every image felt like a reminder that I didn't belong to that category. I wasn't represented. I was erased. Comparison became a habit I didn't consciously choose. I compared myself to strangers, to friends, to women who didn't even know I existed. I learned to measure my worth against curves and cleavage. I learned to believe that confidence came packaged in a body like theirs, and that insecurity was the natural consequence of a body like mine. Slowly, without anyone explicitly saying it, I internalized a lie, a devastating one, that my body was weak, that it was fragile, that it was defective. I began to see my breasts not just as small, but as evidence, proof that my body could not handle growth, pressure, or change, proof that it might fail me when I needed it most. This belief didn't stay confined to beauty. It spilled into everything, into how I saw intimacy, into how I imagined motherhood, into how much I trusted myself. By the time pregnancy entered my thoughts, the fear was already waiting. I didn't just fear change, I feared exposure. I feared my body being asked to do something monumental when I already believed it was barely holding itself together. I feared that pregnancy would reveal what I had always suspected, that my body was not strong enough for transformation. What hurts the most is realizing how young I was when I learned to doubt myself, how early I accepted the idea that my body was something to apologize for. No one ever told me directly that I was broken, but the world didn't have to. It showed me, subtly and repeatedly, what it valued, and I learned where I stood. This is where the fear began, not in pregnancy, not in adulthood, but in a little girl who learned too early that her body would always be questioned. And somewhere along the way, that questioning became my own voice. When I trace this fear back far enough, I don't find a single moment, I find a slow accumulation of wounds, tiny cuts that never bled enough to alarm anyone, but deep enough to scar. I was young when my body first became a topic of conversation, younger than I should have been. At that age, I didn't yet know how to defend myself, so I absorbed everything instead. The comments came casually, almost lazily, said with laughter, with smiles, with the assumption that words dissolve once spoken. "You're so flat. You look like a little boy. Don't worry, it'll come later." Nobody paused to see how my face stiffened, how my chest tightened. Nobody noticed how I learned to laugh along, because laughing felt safer than asking why my body was being discussed at all. What hurts most is that many of these voices belonged to people who loved me, friends, family, teachers. Their carelessness taught me an important lesson very early. Pain doesn't need cruelty to exist. Sometimes it comes wrapped in affection, in teasing, in advice disguised as concern. And because it wasn't meant to harm me, I never felt allowed to admit that it did. As my peers grew into their bodies, I stayed behind. I watched bras become necessities for them, while I wore mine like a costume, stuffed, padded, pretending. I learned to measure myself against other girls, silently ranking where I fell short. Locker rooms became hostile territory. Sleepovers came with anxiety. Even puberty, which was supposed to be a rite of passage, felt like a personal failure I couldn't explain. Then the world outside joined in. The media didn't whisper, it shouted. It told me what a woman was supposed to look like, and repeated it until it felt like law. Curves were celebrated. Breasts were symbols of beauty, of desire, of maturity. They were framed as proof of womanhood, as if without them you were unfinished. Every screen I looked at reinforced the same message. This is what counts. I searched myself in those images and found nothing. No bodies like mine being admired, no softness like mine being praised. Instead, I learned to look at my chest the way the world did, with disappointment. Comparison stopped being something I did occasionally, it became automatic. I compared myself even when I didn't want to, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And slowly, something dangerous happened. I stopped seeing my breasts as just a physical trait. They became a symbol of everything I feared about myself. I began to believe that their smallness meant my body was incapable of growth, incapable of abundance, incapable of change. I translated size into strength and softness into resilience, and by that logic, I decided I had neither. This is how the lie took root, that my body is weak, that it cannot handle pressure, that it is fragile by design, that it might break when asked to become more. No one sat me down and told me this outright, but the message was repeated so often from so many directions that it became truth inside me. I carried it quietly into adulthood, into relationships, into intimacy, into the way I imagined my future. So when I think about pregnancy now, the fear feels ancient. It doesn't start with hormones or biology, it starts with that younger version of me who learned to distrust her own body. The girl who believed her chest was a warning sign. The woman who wonders if motherhood will expose her perceived weakness instead of honoring her strength. This fear didn't come from nowhere. It was taught, repeated, reinforced. And the hardest part is realizing how long I've been carrying it, mistaking it for reality, mistaking it for truth, mistaking it for myself.